Hey guys, Kylo here. I want to take this opportunity to talk about weather. Specifically, what weather should you look for before taking your first flight? Now, as an instructor, I run into this pretty regularly. I have people that come out and are ready to take their first flights, but more often than not, we're waiting on proper conditions to show. The first thing we want to check is the overall forecast. What's it look like? Temperature-wise, there's a lot of things to consider. You're looking for a good surface, a wide area. I really don't want to go into all the details about that, but specifically the weather. What sort of conditions to the air are we looking for to take that first flight? There's an ocean of air above us, and it moves in several different ways, depending on lots of things. But some of the things that we look at specifically for someone taking their first paramotor flight are primarily surface, wind, direction, and speed. A very close second to that are the winds aloft. And then a third is what sort of thermal activity are we looking at for the day? And all these things come together and they need to follow a very narrow window at first. There's a tight gap for somebody, say, taking their first 10 to 20 flights, and then as you get experience, that window can get larger and larger. Now, you go towards the side of low winds, it gets a lot harder. You got to generate a lot more speed on your own. You're doing forward launches only. Those are the hardest to do. And then if you get too strong, there's getting plucked, dragged, receiving an oscillation, a gust. There's a window that's optimal for taking your first flight. That's going to be somewhere around 6 to 7 miles an hour, laminar winds. You want all the winds moving the same directions. You don't want gusts. You don't want any anomalies. You don't want any direction changes. You don't want any speed gusts. Everything needs to be perfectly smooth and perfectly laminar. If you go out and find conditions like that to take your first flight in, the chance of success is increased substantially. Like, you're likely going to do it and do it without hurting yourself or breaking equipment or basically any sort of catastrophic thing. You're looking for 6 to 7 miles an hour, laminar winds on the surface. Now, you want to look at winds aloft. Winds aloft have a lot to do with what's going to be going on just above where you take off. Just because it's good on the surface does not always mean that it's going to be good up in the air. Finding a local pilot, somebody who can mentor you as to what the conditions are like, or maybe even go up and test the conditions to see what they're like in the real world, that's going to be helpful. So if you can do that, do that. Check your winds aloft. There are a few places online that you can go to. Aviationweather.gov, that gives you a really broad stroke as far as what the wind's doing at surface, 3,000 feet, 6,000 feet. Another website that I find is pretty accurate for my area is windy.com. Now, windy, you can look at surface, 330 feet above the surface, 2,000 feet above the surface, and then I believe it goes up in increments of 1,000, all the way up as high as you would want to go. For doing your first flight, you're not going to be getting real high. You're probably going to stick somewhere between surface and 1,000 feet, maybe. Usually closer to 500 though. So say surface to 500 feet, that's the section of air that you're looking at. Obviously you can't see air, it's transparent, but you can see things that are going on in the air. Look at the clouds. Are there clouds? Blue sky days and cloudy days offer different air sometimes. Now, speaking of winds aloft, what are you looking for that would determine a bad time to take the first flight based on winds aloft? When the wind increases such that every 1,000 feet, it shows an increase of 7 miles an hour or more. And I'm just picking a number. Each day is different. Each day brings its own weather. What happens when you get an increase of more than 7-8 miles an hour per 1,000 feet altitude increase from your ground level is you'll get wind shear. Even if the wind is blowing the same direction, because the wind above is moving so much faster, you get a shear, you get rotor in between those areas. And because that wind is blasting, it's just like it's going the opposite way. When you've got winds that go the opposite way, in between you get these rotors, these turbulences. Same thing with thermals. You got thermals going up, sink going down, you get the turbulence in between. That's where it comes from. All turbulence is due to a wind shear, whether it be due to a mechanical obstruction or a differing layer of air that's moving a different speed or direction or both. So that's what you're looking for when you're looking at the winds aloft forecast is speed, number one, And direction change, number 2. Now, there will always be a shift in the direction to some degree due to the Coriolis effect. That's the Earth spinning. The air is getting dragged across the ground with friction. The speed and direction on the surface is going to be slightly different than what you see up above it. There's almost always an angular shift in the direction and usually an increase in speed as you gain altitude above the surface of the Earth. So important to consider those factors as well. You have to kind of look at the overall view, and you'll get better and better at this as time goes on. But if you can find winds aloft that are very close to the surface winds, it's going to be a lot less turbulence. Due to that, it's important to remember that turbulence comes from different things. Say winds on the surface are 7, winds aloft are 10 at 2,000 feet, at 3,000 feet they're 12. Well, just because that there's not much variation as you go up does not mean there's no turbulence. There's just no turbulence due to the winds aloft. You also want to look at the direction. Are the winds blowing the same direction at 3,000 feet, at 6,000 feet? Thermal activity can really bite a new pilot. If they try to launch too late in the morning or too early in the evening, what thermals do is they lift air. The air heats up due to the sunshine. As the air lifts up, air moves around. You've got this washing machine of air bubbles coming up and air coming around and back underneath. You got the meteorological winds are blowing one direction usually. If you look at the winds aloft and you look at the wind forecast in general, it'll tell you which way the winds should be blowing. Say the winds are out of the west and you go to fly, you set up and the winds are coming out of the east. And you think, oh, well, maybe I should set up and launch to the east. But you look up and you see all the clouds are moving with a westerly wind. It's probably a thermal. If you just watch it for a few minutes, I bet the wind will shift back around and you're looking for that cycle to come out of the direction that everything wants to move. Now, this is not regarding if there's a front passing through and you're getting a wind direction change and you've got different directions at altitude than you do on the ground. This is implying that everything is forecasted to be the same direction roughly and not too big of a jump in speed. But if the sun is shining and you can see shadows on the ground, you put your hand on the dash of your truck and it's hot, that's probably going to be some thermal activity. There is no substitute from just watching the windsock for 10 minutes. Just give it a good 10-minute, watch it, see how big it switches, see how big the gusts are. You'll notice these things. If you have a good wind indicator, and I recommend you get a long ribbon on a tall stick and you stick out in the ground ahead of where you're going to be launching, there's just no substitute to reading the air than a good wind indicator. That's what they're for. They're the tools for the job, at least for the surface winds, and that's where you're going to be launching and landing. Those are the most important winds to get a good read on. So as you start to observe thermal activity, you'll start to notice patterns in it. We call them cycles. As the wind cycles, you'll notice it may switch directions, it may lull, it may gust, but you'll start noticing a pattern of these things, and you'll time your launches into one of these patterns. I'm just telling you about this so you know about it. I do not recommend anybody go out and launch in thermic conditions until you have a really good handle on flying. I mean, full control of the glider, several different attitudes and positions and maneuvers you need to be well versed at. Your takeoffs need to be dialed in. Your landings need to be dialed in. Until you can do that consistently almost every time, barring some abort situation, you're not ready to fly in thermal conditions, and they'll most likely cause you injury or damage to gear. So avoid that. Pick days that are smooth, laminar, easy to do. Anything outside of that narrow window is going to be trouble. When you're a new pilot, you may get lucky, but it's likely that you won't. The big troubles I see are people picking wrong conditions. I like to look at a couple of websites, specifically one that I pay for. It's called XC Skies, and I'm looking for two things on the thermal charts. I'm looking for the thermal updraft velocity, and I'm also looking for the buoyancy to shear. And the buoyancy to shear is not such big of a deal, but that updraft velocity will tell you how strong the thermals are in your area. So just looking at that one bit of information can tell you if it's just going to be some bumps or if it's going to be dangerous and you risk collapses or oscillations. I find that oscillations cause the biggest problems with new pilots because they don't know how to dampen them. Once you can dampen an oscillation every time and you know how to do it, then you may be ready to fly in some wonkier air, but Practice these things. Step into it slowly. Pick the morning thermals, the first ones that are breaking off, the first few bumps you feel in the day. That's the air that you should be feeling around in, and learning your glider and how it reacts to these different conditions. There's just no substitute for practice. There's no substitute for going out there and doing these things, practicing. The more you practice, the better you're going to be. That's with anything in this world, especially flying though. How do you know if you are ready to take your first flight? You need to do some self-evaluation. You need to kite your wing in all types of conditions. You need to practice forwards. You need to practice reverses. These are inflation techniques. The launches are all the same. The launches are all forward launches. It's the inflations that are different. A forward inflation you want to do in low to nil wind conditions, and you need to practice these. Even if you're not going to utilize that technique on your first flight, you really need to practice forward inflations. They're the ones that you're going to be doing the most. That's when the air is the best, is when it is forward conditions. So practice your forward launches. They're taxing, they're tiring, they're oh so important to you as a pilot. So practice them. When it comes time to take your first flight, are you ready? Have you ever been flying? Some people freeze up. Some people do everything wrong as soon as they leave the ground. There's a lot going on, and some people's brains just freeze to all that input that's happening. Doesn't have to be like that. If you're having anxieties and you're not right inside of your own mind, then it may not be the day for you to take a flight. Do some self-evaluation, some personal evaluation. Don't have a lot of spectators out there for your first flight. It's nothing that anybody needs to see. This is you practicing, preferably with an instructor or a mentor, or at the very least a close family member that can help you to call the abort if necessary. Even if they don't know what they're looking for, if something looks wrong, just having an outside observer may be handy, but you're gonna be on your own. You're flying this thing solo. These are solo crafts, and it's something that you're gonna have to accept before you take flight. Accepting the risk is something that you've hopefully checked with yourself before you even got involved with the sport, and some people just can't handle it. They don't have the nerves it takes to be a pilot. We're a small portion of the population. People that fly things, pilots. There's not many of us versus everyone else in this world. So it takes a certain salt of a person to be a pilot, and you've got to ask yourself, do you have that? Why are you doing this? What is your reason for this? So you got to ask these questions for yourself. The answers are different for everybody. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, but these are things that you have to ask. So once you've determined that you're in the right frame of mind, you've put in the necessary practice. I can't stress that enough. Just because you can kite the wing and you've gotten just to where you control it, that doesn't mean you're ready. You need to be in full control of the glider all the time. Any situation, well outside that box that you're going to take your first flight in, you need to practice in a little bit of stronger stuff and be able to do it. You need to practice in the light stuff and be able to do it. You just don't want to go to those places on your first flight. You want to find that narrow window of perfect conditions that we just talked about. That's when you're going to be ready. The field, location, terrain, these are things you need to pick a good spot for your first flight. You don't want to be taken off out of a soccer field that has trees all the way around it. That would be a bad spot. Sod farms, airports with grass strips with no obstructions. You don't want any obstructions anywhere around. Nothing to hit, nothing to run into. Even where you park your vehicle is very important. If you park it where you're going to be running, you may run into it. I've seen it happen. There's a video I just saw recently. A guy hit his own vehicle because he was not in control of his glider all the way when he full committed, and he full committed right into the side of his van. Quite exciting, but it was a bad decision to put that vehicle out there in front of him where he was going. So if it's a bad spot, you may have to travel to a good spot, a large beach next to an ocean. Now, water brings up its own set of risk. You do not want to fly anywhere that you cannot land. Now, identify your problem areas: fences, power lines, trees, poles, ditches, anthills, gopher mounds, roads, anything that could cause a problem with your flight, you need to identify on the ground. Do a little scouting mission, do a little research, feel around, look for the mud holes, look for the slick spots. These are the things that are going to cause you problems. Scout your area before you decide to go there and attempt flight. It's important. It'll help you. It's a recipe for success. Pick the wind, the location, and the terrain to all match up, and things will likely work out in your favor. If you start going outside of any of that, you start running into trouble. Things to trip over, things to run into, trees that you think are far enough away, but you may fly into them because you're not in control. Being in control of that glider, having the right mindset, the right skills, the right conditions, the right location, all these things are going to help you have a perfect first flight experience. Okay, you've taken your first flight. You've launched off the ground. What should you do now? Hopefully you've considered the landing. You've considered the flare and the approach and all of these things, because it's coming. Once you've taken off, you're doing a landing. We've got a 100% record. We've never left anyone up there. Everybody comes down. So it's important to think about what you're going to have to do for a landing, an approach. Make sure that the field that you picked has enough room on the backside so that you can make an approach into your landing and land properly. A good area to take off from, a good area to approach from. Your landing zone doesn't necessarily have to be in the middle, just in a good spot. I'll let you pick your own location. I'm not going to do it for you. The bigger the better. That's the word of the day. Bigger the better as far as location goes. But once you're in the air, where should you fly? Say you've got this field, all right, and the wind is coming out of whatever direction. Where should you position yourself in this field? You want to stay on the downwind side of the field so that you can turn into the wind and land if anything happens. Had a situation recently. A new pilot had only taken a couple of flights, and he was finally getting out there and kind of exploring his machine. Figure out how it is to turn, how it is to fly, just, gaining some experience. And what this pilot did was went all the way to the upwind side of the field, low. He killed his motor. He pushed his kill switch into his risers. I did the same thing on my 8th flight, but I was in a better position. I was on the downwind side of a field. Of course, I had my own set of mistakes that I made. I did not have a radio. I went way too far away from the LZ. Even though it was a field, I was 2 miles away from any help. Landed in a bean field into the wind. No stepper landing, no damage, but it was a bad spot. The people that were with me thought I went down in some gnarly stuff, and it made everybody nervous. I did not have a way to communicate with them. I left my radio and my phone. I was just learning to fly, and of course I made a mistake. Same thing. Hit the kill switch on the riser. I've seen it happen since then, and of course I did it myself. But this pilot got on the upwind side of the field, right next to the trees, killed his motor. He was maybe 70 feet up. He had almost no time. He couldn't turn downwind and land. That would have put him a downwind landing. He couldn't turn into the wind because there was no room. He was right against the trees. So he had to do a crosswind landing. It was kind of wonky. He bonked it into the, chipped it into the rough, so to speak. Everything was fine. There was no damage, no big injuries, just some hurt pride and maybe a couple of bruises. But if he had put himself in a better position on the downwind side of the field so that in the event of a motor out, which will happen, you will have a motor out at some point. It'll happen. You want to be in a position that you can make a simple turn or fly straight ahead and land. If you're on the upwind side of the field, make sure you have altitude so that if you have problems, you can go downwind as you're descending and then turn into the wind and land safely. So just a tidbit there. Once you're in the air, always be looking at where you're fixing to go. If that motor dies, you never know. I've seen them die at every part of the flight process, from right after takeoff, during takeoff, low, high, they're gonna die. These motors die. How do you know it's gonna die? Is it running? Okay, that's the joke. So don't put yourself in a situation where you're in a box and you've got no choices left. Leave yourself some options once you're flying. Stay on the downwind side of the field, not so far past it that you can't get back to it, just so that you can get into the wind. If you're at a beach, you don't want to be hovering over the ocean so that you have to turn downwind low. Stay back on the back side of the beach. And so that when you have trouble or if it comes time to land, all you have to do is turn into the wind and land. Think about these things. It's all if with just a little thought, you can make so many more better decisions doing this. You don't have to make the mistakes of pilots in the past if you just make good decisions for yourself. What are some of the things that I see people have trouble with on their first flight attempts? The number one thing that I see, throttle shyness. They squeeze it and they let it go. Squeeze it and let it go. And every time that happens, it causes problems. The full commit, I cannot stress how important it is. Once your glider is up and going straight, you've done the inflation, you've rolled on the throttle, and you started your run, if you will just commit to that run, holding that throttle and steering that glider, the faster you get, the more in control you're gonna be. You ever seen the professional pilots pull their glider up and kind of rear? No, they pull it up and they hit it and they run. And they build speed. That's how you get off the ground. You have to commit to the throttle. If you hold it and dump it and hold it and dump it and you're looking up at your glider, hopefully you've got somebody there that's looking at your glider in the distance and they can give you the abort if necessary, if something is wrong. If the glider comes up straight like you should have practiced it over and over again, what's gonna happen to it? It should be fine, but you have to build the speed to fly. And the only way to do that is to squeeze that throttle and run. And if you don't do that, you're gonna cause yourself more problems than, and I see it over and over again, and I understand why people do it. It's a nerve-wracking thing, taking flight. You've got to be in the right headspace. You've got to do it right. Do the inflation, get on the throttle. You've got to build that speed. And if you commit to it, it usually goes off without a hitch. When the guys finally get past that hang up where they don't want to squeeze that throttle and run, once they do, they almost always have a successful flight. If they've picked good conditions, good location, and they do the full commit, it's almost a guarantee that they're gonna have a proper launch. As long as the wing stays over your head, hey, that's what I see people doing. That's the number one thing. There are lots of other little things, but that is the number one thing that I see people struggle with is the full commit. If you decide that you're gonna launch, make that decision before you even clip in. When you abort, make it a full abort. If anything goes wrong, if your launch is not perfect, if your wing is starting an oscillation, stop, kill, start over, reset. I know how bad it sucks to take all that gear off, unclip everything, take everything out of your hands that you just put in there for a proper launch. It sucks. There's no way around it, but it's good method. Don't try to salvage garbage. You can't turn garbage into gold. If you do, it's sheer luck, and you're not gonna do it every time. Chances are your best shot at success is to stop, pull your glider down, kill your motor quickly, and reset everything and start all over. It's just part of it. I've done it. We've all had to do it, hopefully. That's gonna give you a better chance at success and not damaging your gear or injuring yourself. If it's not right, you can abort. And if you abort, make it a full abort. Don't half-ass get off the throttle and try to fix your wing and then get back on it. It's okay to do that eventually, but it's like a golf swing. If you treat the launch like a golf swing, you don't see people come back with their golf club and then go halfway and then go back and try it again. It's always going to be messed up. You start, you rear back, and you hit that golf ball. And I'm not a golfer. I see the golfers do it. And if I ever see anybody come back, stop, and try to do it, it's the same way with inflating and launching a paraglider. You can't just stop in the middle of it. It's one smooth motion from the ground to the run to the launch. And if you do it right and you do it smooth and you give it the full commit in good conditions, in a good location, hey, you got this. That's my 2 cents that I'm donating for the sport today. I hope you liked this video. If you did, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you didn't, I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. I get one every video. I don't even know if they watch it. I think they just go there to click on it. So I've been studying this weather thing a long time, this micrometeorology, and I'm gonna have some other videos coming up soon on specific weather conditions and what to look for to take flight. I hope you like this one. I wanted to gear this one towards the beginner pilot, someone who's never taken a flight all the way up to maybe their first 10 flights. I just really want to let those people know what to look for, how to look for it, and what problems that I see for someone that's in that situation. All pilots have been there. We're all there. It's nothing to be embarrassed about that you're not super smooth in your skills, but all it takes is a little practice and you can be. Even the pros have a bad day every now and then. It's not a big deal. Just do it safe, do it right, and everything works out pretty well. You need to trust your equipment. The equipment if it's in good shape and it's hooked on correctly, hey, you're gonna be okay. If you learn to do that, and we're not gonna go into all the basics. This was mainly a weather video, but I just wanted to share some of the insights that I've gained over the years of experience that I've attained. And I wanted to share that with y'all, the community. I appreciate all the love, and I love reading the comments. Make a comment below if I missed anything, or if there's something that you want me to add into a future video. Feel free to comment below. I really enjoy reading those. My policy on starting the motors on your back or on the rack. There's really just no other good way to do it. There's no other safe way to do it. I've heard the naysayers, and I've also seen all the pictures of people missing some portion of their fingers. And I've got on my fingers, and that's because I quit starting that silly thing on the ground. I decided years ago that I was not gonna do it, and I've not done it since. I've either strapped it to something, put it on a rack, I've secured the motor, or on my back. And I've actually had a motor run away before on my back, and I was able to control it fully because it was on my back. And it was after I had started it. It was during the warm-up process. I kind of blipped the throttle a little bit, some stuff broke on the carburetor, and the motor went to full power. This was minutes after I had cranked it up, so it could happen at any time. Be vigilant. Don't ever turn away from a motor. Don't start one on the ground. It's just bad juju. The number one way to get hurt in this sport, start a motor on the ground. It either ends in chopped hands usually, or chopped other stuff that's important for life. So remember that. And I'm not your mama. I'm not going to judge you if you do it, but I do know that your chances are far greater of getting injured by doing that. It's proven. The statistics are there. The pictures are on the internet if you're into that kind of thing. It's not good. The other thing is flying over water. That's what kills people. That is the number one fatality. Number one way to die, go fly over some water. Just, if you can avoid doing those two things, you greatly increases your chances of not getting hurt and not getting killed on a paramotor. Something to consider. I just wanted to throw that in there as a safety warning. I hope you listen. I hope you make the right decisions when it comes to stuff like that. Those are the things that hurt you and kill you. Self-trainers. I know you guys are out there. Hey, I respect you for what you're doing it. Again, I'm not one to tell you that you have to have an instructor. For those of you that picked an instructor and have received formal instruction, bravo. That's a good decision. That will get you further quicker than those who don't. But for those guys who don't, hey, I respect your right to do it. I almost did it myself. I came that close, but I chose to go the instructor route, and I recommend it. It is helpful. But for those guys in between, I mean, you do save yourself a little money by not getting an instructor, but that's where my services come in, and I just got to throw a plug in here for that. Yeah, I know, no shame in my game, but I offer paramotor lessons, just a service. Maybe you need an assisted first flight. Maybe you need a motor set up correctly and balanced properly, and to go through some exercises. Maybe you need lessons on weather, launching, landing. Basically any technique involved in the sport, I can teach you how to do it properly for a small fee. I charge $100 for ground-based instruction, and I charge $200 for any sort of flight instruction, whether that be tow operations or assisted motor flights, and that includes the setup. I teach people to fly. I teach people to kite. I teach people about the gear. That's what I would like to offer to the community. Not a full school. I call it a school because we do teach and we do take lessons. But if you've done the kiting exercises and you've bought a motor, but you're not sure how it all goes together, that's kind of where I fit in. Bring that stuff to me. Bring the skills that you've practiced. We'll pick a good optimal weather window, and we'll go out there and I'll let you show me what you got, and we'll determine if it's your time to fly or not. And if it is, I will help you do that safely, effectively. If that's your thing, holler at me. Best way to contact me is through my Facebook Messenger. No, not everyone's a Facebook user. If you're interested, sign up, do it. It just takes a minute, no big deal. But I had to throw that in there. It is something that is kind of in between self-training and a full formal school instructional course. I think I'd like to think that I charge appropriately for that. If you're in the business for that, I'm available. I'm in North Louisiana most times of the year. I do travel around, and if I happen to be traveling to an area that's near you, I've been known to make some coastal trips with students for some good air and proper conditions, if there's enough people interested, I would be game to take a trip to do like a little group course. So contact me if that's something you're interested in. I just want to give you a heads up on the next couple of videos that are going to come out in this studio series that I'm producing here. Probably the next one is going to be midday flying. I've got a video coming up where I actually check the weather myself for a flight that I'm going to do, and I'm going to take you through everything that I looked at, what all is entailed in my checks, and what I'm looking for, what I'm feeling of. Then we'll go flying, or maybe we won't. You'll have to tune in to find out. If you want to get notified when the next videos are released, click the little subscribe button down there and the notification bell beside it. And as soon as I drop a video, you'll know, and you can get that information and incorporate it into your own flying. So for now, it's going to be much love, guys, and Kyle out.